This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice.
I discovered the power of what I will describe as a target market. Oftentimes people use the word niche, but I discovered it back in, I want to say 2014, when I started studying a gentleman. His name was Michael Port, and he wrote a book called Book Yourself Solid. And so I became a student of his. And I think the key lesson that really stuck with me at that point was the idea of having a target market. So just to kind of recap what you said, it's the idea of creating a market and being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I come from a background, before I got involved in what I do now, I used to work with a very local market. And so it was, geographically determined, and it was basically the people in that geography. But when I made the switch back then to really working with people online's huge. I mean, it's everybody,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so, the question becomes is, well, how do you stand out? How do you compete?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sivarajan, and welcome to the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm excited to have Paul McManus with us. Paul is a thought leadership and authority marketing expert who has transformed the way financial advisors and professionals present their value to the world. Through his company, More Clients, More Fun, Paul equips advisors with innovative strategies to elevate their personal brands, establish themselves as trusted experts, and attract high-value clients in a competitive landscape. Paul, welcome.
Hey, Sam. It's great to be here. I enjoyed our conversation that we had a few weeks back, and I've been looking forward to being on your podcast.
Likewise. So I think a good start for the audience is tell us a little bit, Paul, about how you got into this business of helping financial advisors and professionals better position themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So my backstory in this starts back in 2016, and at the time, a gentleman, his name was Shane Walls. He reached out to me, and he was an advisor. He was successful by all measures. He was doing a couple $100,000 of commission per year on a steady basis, but he really wanted to grow and scale his practice. And so the long story short is that over the next 2.5 years in working together, I helped him go from that couple $100,000 of annual income to $2.5 million of commission. So I
Wow.
essentially helped him X what he was doing. And you can imagine that he was super excited. I was excited because, just being part of that kind of transformation is always exciting. But most importantly, as a result, his producer group and the companies that supported him, they noticed the significant uptick in his business. And so they reached out to him and wanted to know, what's going on, what's different, what's your secret sauce, so to speak. And he was gracious enough to point the finger in my direction. And so at that point, they invited me to speak at their conferences, which I took them up on. And I just really found my market. So, I'm not a financial advisor myself, but really ever since 2016, I've been working pretty much exclusively with financial professionals, mostly wealth managers at this point, but just help them develop what I describe as authority-based marketing systems. And the key one that we help them with is to help them write and publish a book.
That's a phenomenal result for Shane. I mean, can you perhaps highlight the one or two things that you would say were the key catalysts for getting him to achieve that 10 times growth?
Yeah, it's been a bit now, but just going back, I mean, really, aside from the book itself, it was just really helping him key in on who his ideal audience is. I think a lot of financial professionals, at least the ones that I talk to, oftentimes they work with a cross section of people. If I ask them, who's your target market, at best it might be business owners, but
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it's not even that. Usually it's like it's anyone that has a pulse in a checkbook is my ideal client,
Right.
which in effect they're kind of competing against everybody, and they don't really stand out there. And so one of the key things that we worked on over that time and to really help him hone his message was who is that ideal audience for him. And we discovered that over time that it was real estate developers. So not just business owners, but real estate developers. And he he was a financial advisor, but he did a lot of premium finance life insurance, and we really keyed on a message for him of helping real estate developers essentially eliminate their capital gains tax
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
99%, which is significant, especially if, the more you make, the more capital gains you have. I mean, it's potentially millions of dollars of savings and taxes. And so the more we were able to refine and hone in on that message, then we're able to package it up in such a way that we could reach out and attract the right people. So that I think just the refinement of who his target audience was really the biggest game changer.
That's such an important point. It's counterintuitive, this idea of focusing on a very narrow niche. It goes against almost all logic that all of us kind of take, right? That we think we should have as broad a market as possible. But having that niche and honing into what is your unique value proposition to them, I believe works because you're able to separate yourself from the rest of your competition who would not be able to offer the same value to that same audience in the same way. And as a result, I suspect that you can actually charge, first of all, more of a premium price,
Yeah.
but you're not wasting time, effort, and resources chasing prospective clients that the fit isn't there. Is that a good way of summarizing the advantages of honing in on that niche?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I discovered the power of what I will describe as a target market. Oftentimes, people use the word niche, but I discovered it back in, I want to say 2014, when I started studying a gentleman. His name was Michael Port, and he wrote a book called "Book Yourself Solid." And so I became a student of his. And I think the key lesson that really stuck with me at that point was the idea of having a target market. So, just I mean, just to kind of recap what you said, it's the idea of creating a market and being a bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Hmm.
And I come from a background, before I got involved in what I do now, I used to work with a very local market, and so it was, geographically determined, and it was basically people in that geography. But when I made the switch back then to really working with people online's huge. I mean, it's
Yeah,
everybody, right? And
exactly.
so, the question becomes is, well, how do you stand out? How do you compete? How do you stand out in the sea of other people? And so for me, just personally, the idea of a target market really clicked. And I've found, because as I said, I've been working pretty much exclusively with financial professionals since 2016, and life just gets easy. I mean, you start where you start, meaning that you have to kind of, build your clients, and you have to create knowledge and relationships and all those good things. But it starts to snowball over time. And so you start to become better known. People start talking about you. You get the
Right.
word of mouth effect. You're able to go on a podcast like this and talk to, financial, to your target audience, and life just gets easier. And so at this point, if someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm not a financial professional, I'm not a financial advisor, but I want to write a book. Can you help me?" I have to think about it, because technically we can, but
Mm.
all the synergies and benefits that accrue to working with that specific audience, aren't there. And so by and large, I don't look for those opportunities whatsoever. But if they show up, it's just typically it's not a good fit. I mean, I'm so accustomed to working with my audience, and life is so easy. Not I don't say easy, but it's so relatively simple and easy, that I just love having a very focused audience. And just the people that we help. I mean, again, it's like not everyone totally embraces it, and we work with people, but the more they embrace it and they're able to really go all in on working with that specific audience, I mean, I see that is the way to really scale a practice in many ways.
But the interesting takeaway from what you just said that I want to highlight for the financial advisor audience is that you're still getting calls from people that aren't in your niche market. And then it's up to you to decide whether you want to take them or not. So you're not even marketing to them. But because you focus on this niche and become well known for serving that niche well, you're getting people from outside that niche contacting you, putting you in the envious position of deciding, am I going to take this client on or not? Right?
It really is the envious position, right? Because it's completely counterintuitive what you think. You think, oh, someone comes to you for your help, and you want to, bend over backwards to see how you can help with them. And it's like, I'm like, is this worth our time as a company? So yeah, no, it's definitely, it's fun. I mean, it's very very ironic, isn't it?
Yes. So, in your experience, Paul, having dealt with financial advisors, what do you think is their biggest misconceptions in terms of building authority and personal brand? And why do you think these views or perceptions persist? And how do you think advisors can overcome them?
Yeah, I think so. Let's talk about authorship specifically because I think that'll be a more concrete example. And to me, just to kind of zoom out for a second, there's different ways to establish authority. I think authorship is one of the key ways to do it, and counterintuitively, it's one of the easier ways to do it. And so, just if we talk about becoming an author, I think like many professionals, is just it seems like a daunting task. Now, I know that you've written several books, and so I'd love to get your take on this. But for your average successful financial advisor, they're busy. They don't necessarily consider themselves writers. And so if you say, so if you say, hey, you should write a book, maybe they've thought about it, but usually it's more like on the bucket list of something that they might want to do at the
Right.
end of their career to share their wisdom. And I'm here to say that you want to do it now because there's so many benefits that accrue to your practice and growing your business of that authority that comes from authorship, that now is the right time. And you don't have to go and take a year sabbatical and get the cabin by the lake and start smoking a cigar and all those things. I mean, those things are nice.
You
I
can
mean,
do that.
I mean, I'm not against them, but we've developed a process that essentially helps busy, successful advisors write and publish a book in as little as 6 weeks. And so once you kind of get your head around it being feasible, and then I guess one more thing I'll add to that is that what we recommend people do, and this is the basis of my book, The Short Book Formula, one of the points that I argue for is that you don't need to or necessarily even want to write this long war and peace tome that, one, most people will never do, but B, your ideal reader will likely never read, right? I
Hmm.
mean, I I can imagine that you're, a reader and you absorb information. I mean, I'm a reader, but by and large, if the book's too long, I might get into a couple chapters and then give up. I have a, Audible and a bookshelf back there filled with books that I've half read or not even opened yet. And so in my book, I make the case that the ideal book in today's environment for a financial advisor who's looking to do it primarily for positioning, authoritative positioning, and as a tool to attract their ideal clients, is a book that's somewhere between 12,000 to 25,000 words. And I realize that, most people don't, can't really translate that. So what that really means is that it's a book that can be read cover to cover in 1 to 2 hours, right? So if someone is motivated, has a problem, wants to learn more about a subject, that's much more doable for your average person to do.
Hmm.
And so that's really the kind of book that we really recommend people think about doing. And once you kind of get that framework, and then our process of essentially helping them talk out the content of their book versus having to sit there in front of a typewriter and a blank sheet of paper, suddenly it becomes much more achievable.
That's a great point. It's not about writing the next great novel or the next great book, etc. If your objective is to get on a bestsellers list, then there's a different work and effort and everything else that's involved. But to your point, in my view, if you're trying to establish your authority, if you're trying to create awareness of what it is that you do and what you do well, it goes back to your point that you identify your target market, where you can stand out, where you want to play in.
Yep.
And I think that the idea that you said that, okay, if this is what you are doing, if this is how you are doing your pitch, how you're servicing your clients, if you think about if my ideal prospective client walks in the door,
Mhm.
what would I say to that person to convince them that A, I understand their needs,
Yep.
B, that I have the right solution, and C, that they can trust me to execute it properly? I think in effect, that's your book. And most advisors, I think, are probably more comfortable delivering that pitch or presentation or whatever to their client than perhaps writing it down. But in today's day of technology, I think if you just kind of have a recorder in front of you or your iPhone and you talk to it for an hour or two, pretending like you're talking to a client, or better yet, record it when you're doing a pitch with your client, right? And anonymize and everything else. But to me, that sounds like you're breaking the back of the most of the effort in terms of getting that book. without taking away from your short book formula guide. But I think
Sure.
to your point, it doesn't sound that insurmountable the way that you're describing it, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It's if you talk about a 1 to 2 hour type book and it's focused on your target audience, focused on what your value proposition is, it suddenly seems to be something that is more on the realm of possibility for most advisors that are out there that want to think that way.
It becomes such that once people realize that, I get a lot of people saying, well, I got maybe, they go from not being an author to suddenly being like, I think I got multiple books in me that I
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
exactly.
talk about. Because, in my mind, a book, it's it's actually the ultimate. I mean, it does so many different things. So one, a byproduct of writing a book is that it helps you clarify your thinking, right? As professionals doing what we do, we have, scattered experiences and knowledge and all these different things, but it really takes you through a reflective process of saying, okay,
Hmm.
what is it, who is my audience, as we talked about, right?
Hmm.
And what are their pain points and what do they desire? And how do I take them through a narrative or a transformation that starts with their biggest pain point and shows them how they can solve that problem, and then by extension that I can help them execute some of the ideas that they've had. And so just a natural byproduct is that it helps people really get strategic about their whole business and who they serve and all those good things. Another really interesting thing, and I do this myself and I've been doing this for a long time and I coach people to do the same thing, is that it's the ultimate time saver, right? So you know, I think a lot of advisors are used to the idea of meetings and presenting. And I think there's two challenges that many advisors have faced is that one is getting enough appointment with
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
right fit clients. And then the second one is that once they've solved that one, it's how long it takes to take somebody from I just heard about you to now I'm ready to sign up and become your client. So I think those are like two of the obstacles. And so the argument that I make in my book for authorship is that fundamentally authorship accelerates the speed of trust. And I mean, for your audience, if you like want to get like one thing from this conversation, it's authorship accelerates the speed of trust. And so it can help you go from these long drawn out processes of trying to, persuade and convince and educate and all these different things with your prospective clients to essentially, if you include the book in that process, you should be able to go from complete stranger to new client, regardless of affluence, in as little as 1 to 2 meetings with an exceptionally high close rate. And so it's the ultimate being an authority, having that authoritative positioning becomes the ultimate time saver.
I really like that, the idea that it accelerates the speed of trust. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, Paul, we talked about the book as one example of building that authority. I want you to talk a little bit about this whole concept of personal brand, because I think that is also a big misconception for financial advisors. And this idea that building a brand, I think, particularly in today's age of influencers and social media, I think that there might be a misconception there. Is there something you can talk to?
To me, when I hear the question, it really comes down to the difference between, say, a corporate brand and a personal brand. So, a corporate brand based around, say, like a logo. I mean, let me throw out an example. And, some people may like this example, some people may not, but I'll use it anyways. Let's take someone who's in the news all the time now, Elon Musk. Now, this guy has multiple huge companies, right?
Right.
But if you're on Twitter or X and follow the news, Elon Musk is his own personal. I mean, people know him and they either like him or dislike him. But he has his own well-established personal brand that's independent of those companies. And so the idea, I think, behind a personal brand is that especially in financial services, I think there's a lot of fear and skepticism. I mean, there's Wall Street, etc. Nobody wants to be taken advantage of, and so I think oftentimes it's hard for us to trust a nameless, faceless
Hmm.
corporation.
Hmm.
So part of the idea and the reason to establish a personal brand, again, it gets back to people do business with people, and whether
Hmm.
you're an individual, solopreneur, solo advisor, or whether you're, lead an enterprise of, advisors, et cetera, a wealth management firm, I think there's a lot of value to establishing that personal brand so that people see, it's just a personal connection. So they see that they're doing business with a person or people versus just a corporation. I think it's a lot more cost effective to do it as well because you're not competing. I mean, the ability to establish a personal brand, I think through authorship as a tool is much more achievable for many people. I think there's different ways to create a personal brand. I guess just from my recent experience, I always bring it back to authorship. I think that once you write a book, it really helps you to flesh out one, your story, who you are and
Hmm. Hmm.
what are the stories, what are the anchor stories that you want to share with people. I mean, if you notice, many people that are on podcasts or, media celebrities or etc., what you'll find is that they have a lot of anchor stories that they tell
Hmm.
repeatedly, right? Because they've thought it through. So I love listening to podcasts, being on podcasts, all those things. And you start watching people on different podcasts. You're like, oh, I've heard that. But these are stories that they've thought through and developed over time that really help to establish that personal brand. And to me, one of the most fun and fascinating things is that when people start telling you your stories when you first meet them, even before you've had a chance to say anything, but they've heard you on a podcast, they've read your book or some combination. They're like, oh yeah, you did this and you did that. I mean, that's like really a unique
Validation.
moment. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's really a unique moment, and I'd love to maybe ask you because I mean, just in getting to know you recently and being on my podcast, I mean, you've authored multiple books, you have a podcast, you do all these things, and so you've developed your own personal brand. What are your thoughts when it comes to personal branding?
Look, you make a good point, and I think most of us in our industry, in this industry, have shied away from this idea of personal brand because the immediate perception is that it's about vanity.
Hmm,
That you want to show here, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it took me a long time to get past that.
yeah. Okay.
I think it is, to me, brand in any format, whether it's corporate or personal, is really about reputation. You go to a particular financial institution, you buy a particular car, you fly a particular airline because that brand reputation
Yep.
means something to you. And I think the personal brand is just an extension of that, especially as you say, when people want to deal with people and then in a very people oriented business like financial advice. I think it's the reputation. When you're asking your client who's very happy to make a referral, what are they making that referral based on? It's on your reputation. What is it that they're going to tell their friend that they should come and deal with Paul? It's the brand or that reputation. And I think if you start thinking of it along those lines, and it's about the value that you're adding for your target market, I think you can get past that hurdle of, oh, this is about vanity, it's about self promotion, etc. There's plenty of people that do that. And I
Hmm,
think the challenge is, and I think you can manage that challenge. It's just to move away from it to say, am I putting this out or am I putting this book or am I putting this thought piece in there because I need to see my name in print? Or am I doing it because I feel that there's some value that I feel that I have to add and that the audience, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's reading a book or whether it's reading a blog, is going to get some benefit from?
yeah. Yeah, and I love what you shared. So let me just kind of expand upon that if I can. Yeah, so I hear you, right? So there is definitely, I think some people may approach it that way, like it's not about ego or vanity or all those things, and so what I would say, so someone that has a big ego in his vein, that they can easily, you know, I mean, I think there's the saying that it just reveals more of who you are, right? So I mean, if you're
Mm-hmm.
already a vain, egotistic person and you build up authority, you're going to probably be even more vain and egotistical. But if you're someone who genuinely wants to help people and you're trying to think about how can I have a bigger impact because I want to help people, I would almost say it's a duty to then figure out how you can create that brand so that you can again, going back to accelerate the speed of trust, how can you accelerate the speed of trust so that people can more naturally find you,
Right.
right? And so it can be very much done in the sense of service and wanting to help people, and then contrast that to what I think a lot of people don't want as well, which is to be kind of that stereotypical icky salesperson, right? And so I would much rather follow the path of authority marketing or authoritative positioning through things such as authorship, so that I don't have to do a lot of selling. I do a lot of speaking, but for the most part, people then come to me, right? And
Yeah.
so, and they come to me when they've already built trust in advance because they've heard me speak, they've read my book, or some combination. They already know enough about me and what I stand for, my company, etc. And so when they come, it's just the nicest conversations ever, because we can
Yep.
just start from the basis of, thank you for scheduling, and how can I help, essentially, right? I don't need to sell at that point because they know enough. And so if you also just contrast it to like more that typical stereotypical icky, like trying to have to convince you to do things that you may or may not want to do. I mean, it's such a positive place to be. I mean, I really have to pinch myself because I'm not by any means a natural salesperson. I'm more of an introverted person. I have to regulate my energy so that I can do
Right.
things. But the calls that I have are fantastic. I love sales because I'm having them in such a way that people are reaching out to me when the timing's right for them, and they know enough in advance about what I do, so that it's just a very natural conversation.
But I think you hit the nail on the head there, Paul. To me, the best analogy I can use is this is the difference between a cold call and a warm referral.
Yeah.
Okay. The cold call is you feel like you're being a salesperson trying to convince somebody who's got no background knowledge of who you are, what you do, and why it's relevant for them. Versus a warm referral, when you're having that conversation, it's a fun conversation that you're having.
It
And
is.
what you're talking about is building that authority and that personal brand so that you are getting a lot more of these inbound leads, these warm referrals. So you don't have to be that cold call salesperson, but you're actually taking the calls from the type of people that you want to help when they're ready to look for that help.
Yeah. It's I think many people understand the idea of a referral and love referrals for the reasons, this transfer of trust. I think authoritative positioning and marketing is essentially a referral on steroids, right? So
Yeah.
it's the ability to take all the dynamics that are built into referral that we like, but we probably don't get enough of, and it's the ability to scale that in such a way that now you get a referral like connection with someone who wasn't actually a referral, but just because they come in a warm way, it feels
Correct.
like a referral. I'll share one more thing that came to mind in terms of the personal brand. So one of my clients, his name is John Cutton, and he runs, I think it's like a $14 billion AUM firm. And so, it's his company. He's the CEO. He developed it from scratch, but he's just been growing like gangbusters. And so he has, I believe it's about 100 advisors that are essentially
Wow.
employee advisors that work for him. But he hasn't worked directly with clients for years, if not a decade or more. And so he's the leader of the company, but he's not hands on in
Mhm.
terms of client facing. But we helped him write and publish a book that was really retail client facing, that took his story and background and all those good things, but really was set up to set up his advisors for success, right? So it goes back to the idea of authority and not just wanting to work with a nameless, faceless company, but you want to work with people. And so now his advisors have used his book that he wrote, and they use that as part of their client meetings or their
Mhm.
referral
Mhm.
process. And so what's amazing there is that he's able to be part of that conversation without having to be part of that
Mhm.
conversation, right? And so, I think that's just like maybe one concrete example of how someone can take that personal brand and really leverage it in such a way that not just benefits themselves but can benefit their whole organization.
That's a great story. Well, advisors often struggle to differentiate themselves, and we're coming back to we talked about finding your niche, etc., but advisors often struggle to differentiate themselves in a market full of similar service offerings. I mean,
Mhm.
so because let's face it, it's a very competitive market, and a lot of the products or solutions are, if not commodities, it's
Mhm.
very hard to differentiate them.
Yeah.
So, what mindset shifts or strategies do you recommend to help advisors better communicate their unique value proposition and connect with their ideal clients? I'm asking, I guess, how do they stand out in
Yeah.
a crowded
Yeah.
marketplace?
It comes back to our conversation earlier about Shane, and really helping him hone in on who his ideal client is. I think there's oftentimes a fuzziness, right? So,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's interesting. I've worked with so many people on this, and sometimes it's done from a place of, just tell me, it's like, who do you want to work with? Well, I want to work with affluent people. We'll take
Right.
dentists,
Right.
right? And it's like, well, do you work with any dentists currently? No, but I hear they have money, so I want to work with them, right? And that's, I think, a bad example of choosing a target market, because you really have no connection with them. And
Correct.
so, it's not just this gimmicky thing where it's like, I'm going to say I work with dentists and now dentists are going to come to me. I mean, you actually have to work with dentists and be committed to working with dentists. I mean,
And know
myself,
their business model and their pain points and the solutions that are unique to that kind of profession, etc. Right?
I'll use myself as an example. So in 2015, I didn't know what a financial advisor was, right? 2016, I started working with Shane Walls, and since then I've been working exclusively with financial advisors. But in that process, and now I've worked with close to 500, I'm just constantly learning their stories,
Hmm.
learning how they communicate, what their pain points are, their desires are, and all those things. And so, even though I'm not personally a financial advisor, I'm well established within the community of financial advisors, so I have a lot of credibility
Right.
there. And so, that going back to that person that wants to work with dentists, is it a good market? Well, if you're really committed to working with dentists long term, then sure, that's possible. But you really want to find a market that, back to your point, to frame it, is that how do you stand out? A target market is one of the best ways. If you can match a target market with a unique niche and service offering, then it's like equally super powerful. What comes to mind right now is I'm working with actually two people. They're going to co-author a book, and their book is about social security optimization. So, that market's probably more competitive in terms of, pre-retirees and whatnot, but the book is narrowly construed to
Hmm.
about social security optimization versus a wide variety of topics. And so they're going to be able to stand out and compete, because when someone's approaching that, that's one of the first things that they want to learn about. And of course, as you and your listeners know, it's like once someone starts talking about that, well, then that naturally leads to other things. And so the more narrow you can go, whether it's people, the demographics, or whether it's the service solution, or whether it's a combination of those, that to me is one of the best ways to stand out. And then from there, now if you layer onto that, okay, I want to, we'll go back to our dentist example, but okay, so this is the market I want to serve. Okay, great. So now how can you really take that to the next level? Well, that's where,
Hmm.
authorship, podcasts, media, etc.,
Speaking.
events, that's where you just need to start really concentrating on how you can become a bigger fish in that pond. Because
You make a very good.
at that point, it's no longer about services. To your point, it's services are commoditized, right? So it's no longer I'm going to work with you because have a lower fee or this or that. It's like, no, you're the person that works with people just like me. Of course, I'm going to work with you. It
Right.
becomes a huge advantage.
Right. No, I think you made a really great point, Paul. The idea of this, going back to your example of the two co-authors on social security optimization. Now, that's a very narrow, specific topic. I'm pretty sure that your co-authors aren't going to be selling that as their service 9 to 5 every day, but getting that focus, getting people interested in their specific knowledge and value proposition in that area. Those customers are then going to sit there and say, okay, I've got other issues that I got to deal with, whether it's healthcare, whether it's retirement living or retirement housing, whatever. You've suddenly expanded it, but because you've targeted your message in such a specific particular way, you're able to stand out and then be able to sell on a broader basis to that client base.
Well, it's what I've found is that the hardest sale is always the first sale, right?
Correct.
It's getting the first sale is always the hardest sale. But once you have the first sale, so to speak, then the subsequent sales happen naturally. And so they're just clever because, sure, they do all kinds of basically they're retirement income specialists, right?
Yeah.
Social Security being one piece of the puzzle. But because they're using this as a tool to really create awareness and expertise, demonstrated expertise in this market, what's going to happen is that more people are going to come to them versus the other guy, and now they have the ability to talk to them about their whole picture. And so it's just so that's an example of service niching, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted to take it to another level, just as a thought experiment, imagine that you help nurses with social security optimization as a thought experiment. So now you're able to say, okay, I'm going to go and find out all the places that nurses hang out, whether it's at events or whether it's
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever it
There are
is,
associations, for
associations,
example, right?
etc.
Right.
And now you're the social security expert for nurses.
Yeah.
Well, now the nurses are going to choose you over these guys because now you not only have the same
Correct.
specialization, but now you're the person that understands nurses.
Their profession as well.
And the thing though is that I think people have heard about this concept and get it, but you can't fake it, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to really become part of that community to be effective, and you have to spend time there, you have to hang out there. And so you really can't just say, I'm going to have like five. I mean, like back in the day, or not recently, but I've heard people say, well, this week on LinkedIn I'm going to help nurses, and then next week I'm going to help
Yeah.
doctors, and then the next week I'm going to do this. And it's like, no, that's not effective whatsoever. It's trying to like play a trick. It doesn't work, because again, it goes back to trust, right? You may create slight awareness with someone, but fundamentally people have to feel comfortable and trust you. And so they're going to judge you based on the totality of what you present and reveal over time. And so that's where, the more you go all in on, say, a market, I think the more effective you become, and the easier your business gets, and where it gets to the point where it just starts snowballing to the point where, things that were once hard become so much
Right.
easier.
100%. It's a long game, and consistency is critical. And on that, part of that consistency, I think, is creating content, which is an essential part of establishing authority. But many advisors may feel overwhelmed by the idea. What advice do you have for making content creation manageable and impactful, whether it's writing articles, being on podcasts, doing public speaking at events, or what
Yep.
have you?
So one of my favorite strategies for authors is to do what I call the virtual speaking tour, which is simply a fancy way to say that once you write a book, is to go and be a guest on podcasts that serve that audience. And so and this is actually a thing that we do as a service for clients, but we essentially act as the booking agency for some of our clients that want the service. And the idea is that you've developed the core message. So you've thought this through, you have the book, you have, your ideas down,
Right.
you have the credibility now to get on podcasts and other media things. And so now, and there's so many different podcasts out there that serve specific niche markets. And so now, say twice a month, you're able to get booked on these podcasts and have conversations, enjoyable conversations like we're having right now. And then that becomes content. But what's really interesting about the approach, especially for that busy person, is that, let's say you do 2 podcasts a month for a year. So 24 podcasts, essentially about your book concept and ideas. Each podcast is a little bit different because different dynamics, host, different questions, but the fundamental core message is the same. And so you just get really good at speaking about your core message and developing it, and it reinforces everything they do. The more you do that, suddenly it's like, well, I need to speak at different places, and you have the message, you have the awareness. It's the same type of message as we talked about. It gets into how you communicate with clients. And so
Right.
it really becomes synergistic, and it saves you a tremendous amount of time, because you're not going out there and thinking about
Reinventing the
what
wheel.
should I talk about today, or what should I present, or this, that, or the other. I mean, it becomes very addictive. I mean, like, I'm like literally addicted to the virtual speaking tour. I need to do more and more and more.
No, you're right. It's a flywheel effect, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're just telling the same story. And to your point, like when you're not, even with your own clients, if you can tell the story and you apply it in a different way, it doesn't tire because they're not remembering it word for word.
Yep.
I think that if you're telling it to different audiences and they're hearing it, you get better at it. It's still a valuable message to deliver, but you're not going back to the well every single time to say, okay, I need new content, I need a new idea. It's not. It's about positioning it, packaging it, and delivering it in a way that is appropriate for the audience that you're talking to, right?
It becomes relatively easy than trying to come up with a speech or something like that. But it also gets you to really hone in on your message, right? Because as
Correct.
you get comfortable, now you can expand. And to your point, you have different audiences. You can make it more nuanced depending on who you're talking to. But you can get better and better and better to the point where it's like, it's just so natural. But again, it shows up in all your conversations, because now your conversations with your clients are that much more effective, and the way that you communicate is that much more effective. It's just fun. I mean, it's like, if I had known. I mean, it's like, I just wish I knew sooner about this whole authority marketing thing, because it makes life very satisfying.
No, I totally get it. But as in everything, it's evolving, right? You have
Sure.
to learn it like a financial advisor's practice. It becomes very satisfying, but at the beginning, you have to go through all of these hoops and hurdles to learn, what works, but more importantly, what works for you, right?
Sure, exactly. So, like, for someone that, let's say, they're naturally a writer, and I think you alluded to it. It's like at that point, okay, there's other ways to do it. Maybe you write an article, blog. Maybe you get, on Forbes, or you do bylines or different things.
Hmm.
So there's different ways to go about doing it. I find that in my experience, and really what I believe in, is that authorship and speaking is what I would describe as a 1+1 = 3 activity, meaning that
Hmm.
there's just such synergy between the two. Because people in our culture, people respect authors for the reasons that many people aspire, few actually do it.
Right.
People also respect people that are willing to go up and speak in public. There's the old Jerry Seinfeld quip about, would you rather be if you're at a funeral, would you rather be giving the eulogy or in the casket? And most people would rather be in the casket. But these are just like two highly influential, persuasive activities. And so, like, my whole thought is that when you combine these two things, it just has that synergy that's really powerful.
That's a great point. I like that visual of that synergy, that the 1+1 is 3, because I think you're right. The two forms that we communicate mostly is reading and hearing, and if you can combine those and still deliver that message in a coherent and consistent way, I think you're actually expanding your sphere of influence.
What what I found interesting, and so I'm in the, I think you're in Canada, correct?
Yep.
Yep, in some of the United States. And so what I found fascinating about this most recent presidential election, put politics aside, but one of the things that I noticed and I heard the media talking about was that this could be described really as the podcast election, meaning that
It's true.
both parties spent more time on podcasts than ever before in history. And
Yep.
arguably, that made a real difference. I mean, Donald Trump, he was on the Joe
Joe
Rogan
Rogan.
show like a week or two or so
Yep.
before the election, and that got like 50 million views. I mean,
Yep.
so it's incredible. Just the tools that are here, podcasts. One of my favorite candidates was actually Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yep.
And what stood out to me about him was that, he's an author, and just, I haven't read his books, but I've heard him on the podcast, on multiple podcasts. He's just such a sharp guy. But you can just hear, just because he's on all these podcasts, describing his ideas, he just gets better and better as he progresses. And he went from, unknown person to now a fairly significant person in the new administration. So it's just an interesting world we live in.
No, I think it's a great point. All of these, they're new opportunities, right? I see that these new channels, whether it's podcasts, whether it's video podcasts, these are new channels, new opportunities. It's perhaps intimidating for the audience or financial advisors to think about. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity because, as you say, self publishing is now easier, cheaper, and faster than it ever has been. Doing a podcast or appearing on podcasts, there's more opportunities to do it. So while it might be intimidating, it is a new media. They are new channels, and there's an opportunity for the advisor that wants to leverage that to get their message out to their target audience in an easier and more effective way.
Well, exactly. And to kind of just maybe play devil's advocate, if you will, and I'd like to get your perspective. If we talked about it, just the commoditized world of things, and how do you stand out? And so, what would your advice be to someone, short of developing that personal brand and standing out in the ways that we've been talking about? What would your advice to someone be?
Look, a lot of what we've said today and talked about today, Paul, resonates with me. I think it is a long game. I think you have to do it for the right reasons. I
Yep.
think you're serving the client in a way, in a solution or a product or a service or a way that you believe in, because that authenticity, I think, is very important, and it comes through. Look, it is hard. You sit there and think that you go from Twitter to X to Blue Sky, from Facebook to LinkedIn. I mean, the different channels are always going to keep changing and evolving. I don't think you have to play in every channel. You just got to figure out where your audience is going to be, and then decide that that's where you want to communicate. It's again, why are you doing it? Who are you doing it to? And are you in it for the long term or the consistency? If you're looking for vanity metrics like likes, then it's a different style and a different process,
Yeah.
right? I don't know that for financial advisors that's the real metric that they look for or should be looking for. Like I get this a lot of times. I mean, I don't necessarily get people on when I post on social media that there's likes and engage and follows and everything else, but I'll have a conversation and somebody tells me on an old-fashioned phone call, and somebody will tell me that I saw your article, I saw
Yeah.
your post. I really liked it, etc. Right? So you can have that impact or effect without it being. It's not the what is called in the industry like vanity metrics that matter. It's are you having an impact? But
Yeah.
I think the idea of creating thought leadership and building authority, I do believe that is the name of the game, and that's the way to separate yourself in a crowded competitive market in a world where AI is starting to make more and more inroads. But it's not, nothing is meant to be easy. I mean, eventually it's going to become the 10-year overnight success story, right? In 10 years, somebody will say, oh, well, I've heard about Paul. I mean, he is the go-to guy. Yeah, but it took you 10 years to get to that point where people are talking about you as a personal brand, right? But it's if you're doing it for the people that you want to serve and with what you want to offer and the solutions that you're passionate about and believe in, it's not going to seem like work.
I think to add to that, I think doing these things is the ultimate relationship vehicle. So, in my experience, one of the things that I've found is most effective to build my business is to create relationships with what could be described as COIs or centers of influence. And this plays out, in a lot of ways in the world, but when you have a platform, so for example, I have my own podcast, and the reason I have my own podcast is primarily because it's a vehicle to be able to invite people to have conversations and get to know them, right? Audiences, so it does multiple things. It creates content that I can give to
Mm-hmm.
my audience, to my email list, to social media, etc. But to me, the primary benefit is that it's a vehicle to be able to build relationships with people that I wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
You and I live probably hundreds, if not thousands of miles apart. So I'm not bumping to you in the street and saying, "Oh, how are you doing?" I'm bumping to you here online, right? So
You're right. Yeah.
so again, just kind of going back to the why do it. I've found that I always have had the best success in building genuine relationships with people that we have common aspirations and goals, and just being able to have the tools such as your own podcast or your own book or different things, just make it that much easier to create the opportunities to meet influential people in your industry. And then of course, birds of a feather flock together, so suddenly it's like, oh, you need
Right.
to meet my 5 friends that do this. It's like, oh, okay. But imagine that approach versus the I'm going to cold call you and be like, hey,
Right.
so
Paul, we're coming to the end of our podcast, so I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I ask all my guests. So if you're ready,
yeah.
number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
I think success is largely about relationships. So just to reinforce what I just said, is that when you figure out how to build relationships with the right people, then success is that much more rewarding and achievable.
Great. Totally agree. Number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
Well, this will sound self-serving, but it'll be read my book.
No, I think that's it's self-serving or not. It's a good tip.
And you can get a complimentary copy of my book, including the audiobook, at theshortbookformula.com. And as we've been talking about, and you can kind of see the method behind the madness in action, but it's designed to be read or listened to in just over an hour. So if anyone wants to kind of go deeper in terms of any of the insights we've talked about today, that would be a great next step for someone.
Awesome. Paul, this has been a great conversation on I think is a very important and timely topic. You mentioned the short book formula website. If the audience wants to learn more about you and what you do, where do they go?
That's the best place. All of my relevant contact information is there. So theshortbookformula.com.
Awesome. Paul, thank you for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. In this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, I spoke with Paul McManus, an authority marketing expert who helps financial advisors stand out and attract high-value clients. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, niche is your superpower. Advisors who try to serve everyone struggle to differentiate themselves. Paul shared how identifying and specializing in a niche, for instance, real estate developers, can transform an advisor's business by attracting the right clients and increasing perceived value. Number 2, authorship builds authority fast. Writing a book isn't about hitting bestseller lists. It's about establishing credibility. Paul explained how a short, focused book, as little as 12 to 25,000 words, can accelerate trust, attract ideal clients, and take an advisor from unknown to sought-after expert. Number 3, content creates conversations. A strong personal brand makes business development feel more like receiving referrals than making cold sales. Whether through books, podcasts, or speaking, strategic content marketing helps advisors form deeper connections and convert prospects more efficiently. As we discussed in the episode, the real differentiator isn't the products you offer, it's the authority you build. A well-positioned advisor isn't chasing clients, they're attracting them. This episode highlights why thought leadership is the ultimate growth strategy for financial advisors. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Future Ready Advisor. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.